Honka stories.
All right. How many people? We got 10 people.
We have 10 people.
It was more last time. That's all right. We'll get
It's
started.
okay. This will be recorded and you can hear it again.
I feel like Sterlin, the way you look right now is like some horror movie, and you're about to got dragged off in the woods, and you're about to get interrogated.
Well, how do you feel? How do you think I feel being a person that has to tell scary stories sitting out in the woods?
Sitting in the woods.
Are you by yourself?
No, I mean, I'm by a cabin. My dad's in a cabin over there.
Oh, okay.
But, social distancing. So you got to get out and stay separate.
Yeah. All right.
But there's a lot of coyotes screaming. So you might hear some of that.
Uh-oh. Tricksters. Yeah. All right. So we'll get started then.
Cool.
All right. So, hey, everybody that's logged on. If you will do me a favor, if you haven't done so already, will you please mute yourself so we don't hear your random dogs barking or you yelling at your children in the background? After you do that, but yeah, this is I'm Apollonia, and I'm the host for Honka Happy Hour. And the guests that I have on tonight, I'm really excited about. I've known both of them for a very long time in different capacities. One is my academic mom, Dr. Kimberly Wieser, and she is the native literature professor at OU. And the other one is an OG friend, Sterlin Harjo. And I've known him for a long time too. I've had a lot of conversations with him, been to some good parties with this guy,
That's right.
Yeah, getting all hodged up.
That's right.
I realized the last time I did a honky
Honky
happy hour, okay?
I want to see that show. I want to see that show.
Maybe that's the one we'll do in December, okay?
Yeah.
Christmas.
You do that. You can change it to that during the summertime.
Those are them creek stories, when you're down in the Illinois River.
Yeah.
So, anywho, I realized I didn't explain last time. I had a really good response to last episode of Honka Happy Hour. Thank you all that tuned into that and gave me your feedback. And, I heard from one friend that he had a fire in his backyard and snacks, and he had his whole family out there with the fire watching it. So Honka, because I didn't explain it last time, is a Muskogee word, which is what my tribe is, and it's our word for boogeyman or spook. So that's the origins of Honka Happy Hour. I want to also say too, I do have a PayPal and a Venmo set up if you just wanted to give tips to the storytellers for taking their time out on a Friday night to share stories. You can find my Venmo and the PayPal in the Facebook page.
Yep.
When I sat down on it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. So I don't know I know both of them are good storytellers. I've heard stories from both of them throughout the years. Daniel, I think you need to shut your mic off, please. You need to mute it, Daniel Claybach. Calling my friends out. I don't care. So I don't know which one of you wants to start telling some stories, but it's just kind of a loose flow. Formal by any means. This isn't like an academic presentation. Kim, you want to start, I guess?
I was going to say youth before beauty and let Sterling go, but
Oh, you want?
Go Sterling. You go.
I was going to tell, just a story that I feel like kind of shaped why I tell stories and why I make movies, it was I think it was something that really just sort of embedded in my brain from a young kid, and it was something that I always kind of came back to. And you hear different versions of it, and then later put different pieces together, you know, and things like that. And you know, I heard it directly from a person that was there, as an uncle of mine, and he's passed on now. So I feel like I can tell it now. Um, uh, but you know, I'd always heard this story that my my grandpa had was able to shapeshift and turned himself into a log and was hiding from police by doing that. And you know, it was just one of these stories that I don't remember the first time I heard it because it was always there. And as I got older, I got more interested in kind of the history of it. And you know, one time, one of my aunts, I was asking her about it, and my uncle, who was there and who was a part of this story, happened to be at my house, and he was in his 80s at this point. And she said, "You ought to ask him; he'll tell you." And so I asked him about it, and he sat down and he told me. He was in my room, I remember, and he told me a story. But you know, he was there, and you know, and like later I pieced together other family members told me more about it. But there was a point in our there was a point in history where Creek and Muskogee Creek and Seminole people, they outlawed the stickball game where we play ground against ground because people were getting hurt, and it was, you know, there was a lot of it was hard to kind of keep control of that, you know. And there's, you can even read like pioneer papers and stuff about like stories of, you know, them people watching those games, and like they were called illegal games for a while because you weren't supposed to do that. And my grandpa was a medicine man, and at a ceremonial grounds, and he was they were doing that game, and he was against it because they didn't like the Warriors getting you know, hurt. And you know, this is like early 1900s, and they they did and but he had they some of the Warriors were going to play the game anyway, and he was very much against it. And he some Warriors came to him and asked him kind of for his blessing, basically, and he refused to do it. And an argument broke out, and I don't know how bad the fight was, but a fight happened, and I think he was getting jumped, and he shot them and killed them. And you know, it was a really hard, dark situation, and my uncle was there. He was there with my grandma. My great grandma was there too. And you know, and they were on a wagon and they left, and they you know, and my uncle told me later, like he was on the run and he was hiding out from US Marshals. And my uncle told me later that he would get sent out every morning and they would wash his face and you know, medicine, and his grandma would, and she would send him out with a plate of food. And he said that you know, when people change back in the day, when they could change, he said that when you come out of it and you come back to human form, you can't see well. And my grandpa had a gun near him, and um, he would have to, my uncle would go out as a little boy, he'd have to go out and he would yell. He would say, it's me, grandpa, it's me, it's Robert. And that, and that was because he was afraid that his his grandpa would think that it was a cop or something, or someone out to get him. And he couldn't see, and he was, you know, he didn't want to be shot. And he said he would come out of it and he would hold the gun on him, and he would have to yell at him and say, no, it's me, you know, like don't shoot me. And and you know, that's kind of the first bits that I heard of it, and that's what Robert told me, and my uncle. And you know, then like you put more pieces together, and there were these scars on his neck. And uncle told me later that he was actually shot one time, like when he was bringing food out there, because my grandpa couldn't see and thought it was so like a US Marshal coming to get him. Eventually my grandpa turned himself in. He was tired of like running. And and you know, there was a trial and all kinds of stuff, and he got let off for self-defense. And you know, there was a and I remember they were saying that when he said he saw his grandpa as the log, that it looked like there was a lot of different colors in the log, and it looked like it was moving. And you can look at old petrified wood and they look kind of rainbowish, like there's all these colors, like in certain ways that petrified wood turns. And like another uncle had held this picture and would tell me about it. He was like, that's what it's supposed to look like. That's what it looked like. And there's apparently like even a news story in the Holdenville newspaper about it that says sort of like nonchalantly, like, yeah, and he got away by turning into a log, but like it was a story that I grew up with, and you don't question it, especially like when it's embedded in you, and especially when you have an elder telling you about it, in that matter of fact way. And there were stories about how there was another elderly woman that lived out near where they lived, and he and that woman would kind of sharpen their skills, shape-shifting skills together. And one would go out and change, and the other one would have to go find them. And it was a way to kind of like, I was always told they use shape-shifting in battle. And because there wasn't as many battles anymore, you didn't do it, but you still had to change and show they would keep their skills sharpened that way. And, I think that like the thing that I take from that is like, I don't question any of our stories about truth or what's made up or whatever. I like to accept them as fact, and that, we grew up differently and our cultures are different and our facts are different from other people's facts or truths, but I always try to sort of strive for that in storytelling. Like whenever I make movies, that's what I aim to do. And that's what I want to do is show that sort of magic realism, but like show it in a way that isn't like is from inside of our culture telling that story, instead of like other people looking at our culture and telling that story. Like I want to tell it from our point of view, and our point of view is that this stuff is real and we don't question it, and we accept it as fact. Because I don't care where you're from or what your background is. If you were sitting with my uncle and he was telling you that story, you would believe it, you would believe it. And that's the way that I like to try to tell stories. Like I just think that was a story that was just embedded in my brain from when I was young. And I kind of hold that as my inspiration of storytelling. So yeah, that's my story.
Yeah, I forgot about that story. You told me that story like many, many, many years ago, some late night.
Yeah.
And yeah. By any chance, is this the same grandpa that you made a movie about?
No, different side of my family.
Mhm.
This was another grandpa on my mother's side, named Nogazi Harjo. And I think it was even Hajo back then, but it was not even, the changed colonized version, which is Harjo. But yeah, I mean, like what's cool is like I grew up with stories on both sides. I mean, on my grandpa's side, on my dad's side, where the movie's about that grandpa, his wife, my grandma, was a white woman from Sasakwa, Oklahoma. And Sasakwa is a mainly native town. Yeah.
Hey, in case people don't know what movie I'm referencing, you want to
Yeah.
tell them? Movie
Yeah, it's called This May Be the Last Time. It's about it focuses on Muskogee Creek hymns, but it also talks about my grandpa and his disappearance in 1962. And but my grandma on that side was white, and she passed away. But since I made that movie, but she was an amazing storyteller too, and she grew up in this town, which is Sasakwa, and a lot of big, huge Seminole Indian population there. And my grandma was like one of the best storytellers on that side. Like she loved scaring people. She loved telling scary stories. She always talk about like, she would talk about medicine stuff and native stuff because she grew up with all native people. But then like she would also like, there was this story about uh, there was this, I'm sure every town has this, but there was this crying angel statue out at the cemetery, and they would they would go out there at a certain point and you would see it cry, and that was the thing. And one time they would always tell the story. My aunt, whose house is right over there, actually, her and my grandma, were my mom and dad went to watch a scary movie at the theater, and my aunt and my grandma decided to scare them, and they lived in the house. We lived in the house behind my grandma for a while, and so they went back there and opened the door. They had the key, and they put a dummy. They had army fatigues and a dummy. They stuffed it, and they had like a mannequin head, and they put the mannequin head there, and they had like combat boots and everything, so it was like laying in the middle of the floor, and they put fake blood all over its face. And then they went and hid and waited on my mom and dad to come back from watching this scary movie. And they tell the story that like mom and dad went in, and as soon as they went in, they opened the door, that mannequin head fell over, and it looked like it turned and looked at him, and there was blood all over its face. And they tell the story that dad didn't even wait on my mom. He just like took off running and jumped over the car and just like kept running, and like left my mom on the porch to deal with whatever dead person is in the house or whatever. Both of them were yelling as they ran out. But like, my grandma was I just think like we, coming from rural Oklahoma, whether it's the native people in my family or, my grandma who was white, like they have this culture of storytelling, and like there was nothing more fun than sitting around and just scaring ourselves, and that was my favorite, both sides of my family, my favorite thing to do.
I totally agree with you on that. That's why I still love like getting together with friends every October or just random times. I mean, you and I, like we've been at like language immersion, like Muskogee language immersion sessions out in the country, and Indians get together and we just tell stories, and that's what I love about our culture so much, that I find missing overwhelmingly from like dominant white culture. And I don't quite understand why that is, why they keep up with these traditions of passing on stories too.
Yeah.
So Kim, do
Mhm.
you have any that you would like to share at this time?
Sure. I think I'm going to start with I'm not Cheyenne. I've got Southeastern Native ancestry. I'm not enrolled, but I had an adopted Cheyenne grandfather for about 25 years who was a ceremonial person. And he spent about 25 years out in New Mexico. And he actually had two specialties as a ceremonial person. One was dealing with cancer, had a 100% success rate praying for people around the world with cancer. And his other specialty, while he was out in New Mexico and Arizona for years and years and years, was busting witches. So very experienced in these ways, but he told me stories, and he had me write down things. And this one's not actually a witch story, but this is a story about some stuff that happened shortly before his birth. And he said this was a true story. It happened about 1920. Maybe just a little bit before that, and it was south of Thomas and sort of the Weatherford area, kind of southeast from there. And there's like three little mountains that you can see toward the South Canadian River, and you can kind of see them from the highway. But I guess there were some Cheyennes camping there, and they used to still do that, even though they had homes. They would camp out still and take their TVs and tents and go out there. And I guess there was this monster that lived out there, and what they call it in Cheyenne is a two-faced monster. And so it had one head, right, but it had two faces on it. And there were some ladies that they heard, that it lived over that way. And so for some reason, they decided they wanted to kind of check it out. And so they decided, to go over there, and the men kind of all knew that the women were talking this way, and they'd been cautioned not to do this. But, they were really, really curious about this guy because it was, different, and they'd heard so much about it. So for some reason, they got some calico and some tobacco, like they were going to make offerings. and they took him out and they put him on a tree stump where the area was that they knew, that he was usually seen. And anyhow, this guy, I guess, he got mad. He just wanted to kind of be left to himself. He didn't like people coming around. And so instead of being honored, he got mad. And so he starts coming toward these women and chasing them, and they're going toward their camp. And as he was coming, any place that he would look, they said it was like lightning shot out from his eyes and it would hit the ground. And so these women were obviously very frightened, right? And they're screaming and they're coming toward the camp, and everybody sees what's going on. And they all get terrified and they all run to this one tent where the ceremonial person was staying. And they're just begging to help out in some way. And I guess the ceremonial person had what they call a spirit, right? He had a helper spirit. And so they said, hey, ask your helper spirit, what do we do? These women, they took the calico and this tobacco and they made this monster really angry. So that spirit, it told him, said, look, you got to get the help of the thunder. And in Cheyenne, there's two different words. There's a word for lightning, and then there's a word for thunder, which is like that feminine negative energy that comes up from the ground that makes the lightning bolt hit the ground. So they asked for that help from that thunder, and the thunder was chasing that monster away. So every time that lightning came, that other charge would come up from the ground, and it was driving that monster back. And so it took like all night to drive the monster away from the camp. But then right before dark, they told them this, before dawn, they told them, go ahead and pack up your camp, but whatever you do, as we're packing up, don't look back. So as they were going, there was this one little girl that fell down, and the people just left her, right? And I guess when she fell, she hit her head and she was dead. And they ran off. Everybody ran off and they left her like that. And they ran to this other encampment near what they call Cantonment, and by the dam up there by Canton Dam. And that little group of Cheyennes told everybody else that ordeal that they went through. And they went way into the middle of that teepee circle. And they were so scared that they camped in the middle of that camp, and they wouldn't be near the edge where everyone else was. But, to this day, there's stories of that monster that lives out there. And that's another one, like Sterlin saying, that's handed down. And it's not something that's a story for just entertainment, even though we're telling stories right now. To me, the story kind of says, there's things out there, and you really shouldn't go intentionally to just try to mess with them, right? Because if these things wanted to interact with people, they'd be coming around. So, and that's just the way that I was taught that one.
Yeah. I know that's a thing. I think it's like that I've had to explain to some of my non-native friends is that whenever we sit around and we share these stories, they need to be pretty respectful of them, because it's not just, for me at least, it's not just stories that you just tell to just anybody generally, even though I'm kind of doing this online Zoom thing. But there's certain stories though I'm willing to share in this format, and other stories that I know both you and Sterlin understand where we would never share them online format.
You've heard a lot of the stories, and one of the things when you were asking me to do this, I was like, damn, I don't know what I can tell. And that's also why I decided to tell a story about came from my uncle firsthand, and he's passed on, it was something that he shared with me. But there's still stories that it's funny because when I tell, I have a greatest hits that I tell, which you've heard. And every time I tell them, that people are like, man, why aren't you making a movie about that? And I'm just like, I can't, I can't do it. It's it's best left in those stories, I think, so there's certain things that I won't indulge as well, because I think what Kim's saying too, it's they're also meant to teach, and you can decide who needs to hear them or not. But honestly, whenever we were at language immersion with Rosemary and we were telling stories there, she has those big windows
I remember you said you seen something and we're getting all freaked out.
And that was a scary night, just because it was like the intensity of all the stories hitting at once, and like everyone's one upping each other, like, oh well, y'all, let me tell you this one, and like
Good storytelling night because we were there with some elders and they were like first language speakers too. That was a
yeah.
good night. Go on.
And yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me too, the connections that we have as like native people and tribes, like, the deer lady and things like deer woman, like things like that run throughout our cultures, but then also like, even non-native cultures, like with Bigfoot and we call we call them tall men, and just like, these, it's funny, like you see these Bigfoot hunters and stuff, but we always like talked about how, Bigfoot was sort of like in between our physical world and the spirit world, and it doesn't have to show itself to you unless it wants to, so it's like wasting a lot of hours out there squatching, and like looking for this guy or female Bigfoot.
Okay, can we just like talk about that for a minute? Like talk-ish, because those shows were kind of appealing to me when I was a kid, right? But now that I see them as an adult, I just laugh because I'm like, y'all are going about this the total ass backwards way. They're never going to appear to you because you want them to. And this is a really disrespectful way of going about and trying to contact them too.
That's a perfect segue for a story, and it won't take long. It's a big bit. I combined a Comanche word with English, a Bigfoot or a Moopit story. But this one happened, of all things, up at Bear Butte, which is a mountain that like 26 different tribes, use as a sacred space. But it happened to, I lived in Alberta for 4 years, right off the Blood Reserve. And so I have a lot of Blackfoot friends and relatives. And one of my close friends, who I'm still friends with, um, was one of my former grad students. His grandma was so traditional, and the lady was still alive even just a few years ago. But those guys got colonized a lot later, right? Because they're right up against the Rocky Mountains on the east side. So not a lot of people wanted to go all the way across Canada to where they were. And then from the west, people didn't want to cross the mountains. So it took a long time for those guys to get colonized. And his grandma was so traditional. Her parents were older. And when she was 7 years old, she married. They married her to someone. But what she did is, and this was a practice up there too, she grew up with the guy's sister, right? She shared a room with his sister, and they grew up together. And their idea is that if they were raised together, right, they would get along, because they would have similar ways. So, I mean, the marriage wasn't consummated until she was grown, but she got married when she was 7. So just really, really traditional. And she told this story, and her granddaughter-in-law translated it to me because the old lady doesn't speak English. They still have a lot of first language speakers up there. I had one guy come visit my house one day, 20 years old, did not speak a word of English. It was the best
Wow.
thing ever. Because after their residential schools ended, like in the 80s, a lot of those grandmas took their kids home and they homeschooled their kids. And those kids had never left the reserve, and just spoke nothing but Blackfoot. So anyhow, this old lady, her grandson was translating, or her granddaughter-in-law was translating for her. But she was telling me that she fasted up there at Bear Butte when she was a young woman, right? And I've heard all kinds of stories from people of different things they've seen up there. But she was sitting there and she smelled something. And she smelled something really bad, right? And she just was really kind of, oh, you're fasting already. This horrible stench hits you. So she was really trying not to throw up. And the next thing she knew, this Moopits, this Bigfoot, walked right up to her, and it got way in her face. And it looked at her and it said, "The way you humans, you think we smell to you, you smell the same way to us." And it walked off. And
That's awesome.
that was her vision.
That's awesome.
Oh,
Let's remember I'm sitting in the woods here. I'm gonna get freaked out myself.
Well, I got some good ones. You'll be freaked out by the time we leave.
Sterling, do you think you spook easy? Because it seemed like he did at the language immersion.
Oh, I do for sure. Because I believe it, you know.
Yeah. No,
I don't
we
I don't
see.
question it. And
Definitely.
and also like I was a kid that just asked people to tell me stories over and over and over and over and over and over and over, you know. And I think I learned storytelling through that. It was like I was always like the one sitting in the kitchen with the older people, like sitting around with coffee, like tell me that story, you know. And like I've heard it 1,000 times, but I would have them tell it. And I love how they would retell it and change it. I think I love that about our stories, is how they evolve and change. And storytelling does that, but for sure in cultures with oral traditions, you know, like that is how we learn, is through the changing and adaptation of our stories. And you know, it's like, you know, I mean some of these stories probably, you know, are also directly linked to sicknesses and illnesses that were spread, and like things that communities were dealing with that they had never dealt with before, you know, as Europeans were coming. I mean, those stories were evolved and changed and were there from way back then. And you know, what did they manifest themselves into later? You know, like what were, like, was it a honka? You know, was it you know, what was it? I mean, like, it's funny, you know, honka is like the word that I probably heard the most growing up. That and like Vegas and Mado probably. But honkas were, you know, it was like anytime a grandma or a mom or a dad or whatever wanted you to get inside, all they'd say is, get inside, honka's out there, honka's gonna get you, you know. And like that was just like the mantra. So of course I'm spooked easy.
This is exactly how I'm gonna raise Jose. I'm gonna
Yeah.
raise and be like, you know, like Vegas, you know, like Honk is gonna get you. Hurry up,
Yeah.
Otis. Um, hey Ken, quick question though. When you were talking about Bear Butte earlier, are you talking about the Bear Butte that's like outside of Sturgis?
Yep.
Okay, I've been up there a few times. They're up there for ceremony, so that's
Yep.
why I've been to that exact location, and has my son when he was 4 months old. So, um, okay, Kim, do you have any
Yeah.
more?
I think I'm going to try to freak out Sterling. Okay. I'll tell both of these stories are,
Sterlin.
that's right. I
Okay,
will
we're on
say,
this.
while we're on goals, you know, when I first started this native literature career thing, I was around a lot of those old guys. And what all of the writers of the native literary renaissance really did was a moment where they were all relocated in California. They'd sit around on Friday or Saturday night and read to each other. And the first person that made Lee Francis cry won. So our thing's going to be as the first person who freaks out Sterling wins. Okay, the first story is very short, which is why I'm going to follow it up with the second one. I was giving somebody a ride one night from Lawton, Oklahoma to Apache, Oklahoma, on that road that kind of curves at back highway. And as I headed around the curve, I had to stop because there was an animal crossing the road. And I was basically sitting there on my brake, but also paralyzed by what I saw. And my passenger said, "That's a chupacabra." And I said, "Yeah, it is." And it stared right at us, didn't frighten me. I grew up in Texas. I mean, I knew a guy whose uncle had scars all over his back from one, trying to protect the kids, and his mom told them to get under the house when those houses up on blocks. Well, he fought it off. So always was terrified. But when it came down to it, it was undeniably what it was, unless there was some strange hybrid that is a deer kangaroo thing. Because it didn't look like a hyena. It didn't look like anything else I've ever seen. And it just was crystal clear that that's what it was to both of us. And it crossed the road and we drove off. Only mentioned it once again. I brought it up in sweat when someone had had a calf get eaten, a buffalo calf. They said it was a cougar. I said, "Are you sure?" Because me and this person saw a chupacabra one night, and the guy running the sweat asked this guy, is that true? He said, yeah, it's the only time we've ever talked about it. That I know for a fact there's chupacabras in Oklahoma because I have seen one. Next story though. I was up in Alberta for 4 years, as I said. And this happened on the day I started driving home. Loaded up a U-Haul. You got to list every single thing you owned if you're moving from country to country and number your boxes.
Hey, here's
Yeah.
coyotes crazy right now.
And well, they're going to be howling for this story.
I know, freaking me out.
Oh, this was going to really freak you out, man.
He's calling him into you, Sterlin. Calling him in.
Oh, shut up. I knew I shouldn't have came on this thing.
And then on the radio, we hear a news story that made us glad. We were like in Montana by this time, that made us glad we left Canada. Same day we were moving. This guy is delivering newspapers all over Edmonton, Alberta. And on the front page of the newspaper, there's an interview. For some reason, it's like the lead story in the newspaper today. This is the headline. And this Edmonton professor at University of Alberta, or whatever it is, had been interviewed at length about wendigos. So here goes this guy delivering newspapers all day long, all over Edmonton, Alberta. And when he got done, he got on a bus heading to Winnipeg. In Canada, man, there's no roads. There's one highway that goes east-west at the top of the provinces, one at the bottom of the provinces, and each province has one highway going north-south. If you're not in town, the rest of that country is dirt roads. You might have to drive 3 hours out of your way to cross a bridge while you're traveling. So the middle of nowhere in Canada, even on the plains, is the middle of nowhere. I've seen eagles nesting in bushes that were like 4 feet tall because there's nothing out there. And they're halfway between Edmonton and Winnipeg. And this guy that had been delivering newspapers all day, his seatmate is listening to an iPod and wearing things like this. And he proceeds to eat his seatmate. And by the time 5 other men on the bus stopped him, he had cut off his seatmate's head with a knife and was holding him by the hair when they contained him. And that is a true story. And you can research it on the internet and look it up. But that guy went straight Wendigo after passing out all those newspapers all day and ate his seatmate. So don't ever listen to your music with your earbuds when you're on a bus in the middle of nowhere.
About that one. I have one that reminded me of, not because it's similar, but, where my house is, where I grew up, is like on the other side of the town where I'm at. And it's out in the country, and we lived on a hill. And my cousin had died recently, and it was just a weird time, and those clouds that we get, we got them this year, where it looked like feathers. They look like bubbles or feathers that are just all over the sky. Really beautiful. It was all over Instagram. That was there. I remember that happening, and it was after my cousin's funeral, and we were like all looking at these. It was right after we heard he died. We all gathered, and then we were looking at the clouds, and that just happened to be like that. And it was really beautiful, but also kind of creepy. And it was a dark time. And so my dad and I were in this really kind of existential sort of like, what is life kind of mood. And so we're driving out to the country where we lived, and we hit this, we turned the corner of the mile section right before our house. We're getting close. And all of a sudden we see this like light in the sky, and you could see metal around it. Like it was a structure. And we were like, what is that? And we saw it out the side as we were driving by. We're like, what is that? And we just like, we kind of slowed down and was looking at it. It was like, what in the hell is that? And it was coming closer. It was following us. It was like following us. We could see it in the mirror, in the rear views as we were driving. And it was like following us, and we were freaking out. My dad literally pulled a gun out from under the seat, like loaded it, cocked it, and said, buckle up. And we started flying and like going 90, and we could see it in the rear view coming, and it was just like we were flying down the dirt road past our turn to our hill where our house is, just kept going, took a left, ended up on the highway. And then at, just as we hit the highway, my dad goes, "Oh shit, they just put a cell phone tower out there. Forgot about that." And it was a cell phone tower, and we had thought it was like some alien ship chasing us down. I mean, we could have died going 95 on the dirt road. And you know, cell phones were new. I didn't even have one at the time, so it was like in the middle of this field there is a cell phone tower now all of a sudden, and we're not used to it. Now it's like, you know, I can find home because of that thing. It's still there. But when I was young and it just got put in, we seriously thought it was a UFO coming after us. It was awesome.
It's like some real like backwoods creek stuff, man. Hey. What is this modern technology we have going?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a Stephen Paul Judd painting or something. We're just like standing out on dirt road looking at this UFO coming down.
Okay. I'm trying to. Kim, do you have a story? Should I tell a story or what? Do you have a deer woman story? What's going on?
I got a couple of them. I'll segue into that by admitting, though, that there was one night here in Norman that I guess there'd been a wedding, of course, that we didn't know about. And we live kind of near OU's golf course. And they'd let loose those little lanterns, right? With I guess candles or something in those little lit up lanterns, and they were floating all over the sky. And we were coming from Brahms, and man, we knew it was an alien invasion, and I was absolutely terrified. I mean, the kids still laugh at me about that. So I'm feeling you, Sterlin. I've had an alien invasion in Oklahoma too, and there were thousands of them. Man, it was scary. We were done. I just knew we were done. Man, dear woman, I guess Apollonia, I got two very short stories because they're not mine. One of them's not very PG, so I'll have to find a way to get around it. The first one, some of my Cheyenne uncles, you know, they were at a party in Oklahoma back in the 70s, and they said there was this chick there, you know, that was just incredibly good looking. And this was an inside party, wasn't even an outside party. This wasn't even like 49 or nothing. I mean, they were indoors, and they looked down and they could see, you know, that she had deer hair on her legs, and shoes not fitting right, you know, kind of thing. So, you know, they kind of always prep me for, you know, the fact that she exists. And man, I don't know. I know one person that claims to have engaged in fornication with said person. So yeah, I have heard this.
Hey,
I've heard this.
The way that's every one of our uncles' story.
Yes.
About yeah, it's like every time got that. Like I remember my uncle, you know, talking about the hitchhiking, you know, like they picked up a hitchhiker and looked down and there were hooves. Yeah.
What about you, Apollonia? You got any dear woman stories?
Yeah. So hold up real quick. Somebody say something real fast. I got to take care of something in the background here. Just tell a quick story, okay?
Take care of it in the background. Let me see what I could say. You are talking in an echo. Well, so you're back.
Okay, sorry. I had to take care of something going on in the background. Okay, so one of my Cherokee friends told me this. It's a real short one, but he's a Katua Cherokee, and he said that it's always an uncle. Why is it always an uncle, man? It was like some uncle, cousin, something like that. And I'm not gonna say
tricksters.
Uncle tricksters. But
it's like the native version of like you know, asking for a friend. I'm asking for a friend. It's your uncle.
You know what that makes me think real quick? That one meme that I started seeing getting passed around in March, where it showed like this old Indian guy, you know, with old shades on, and it says, "Ask your auntie if she wants to quarantine with me." Okay, somebody's Katua Cherokee uncle or cousin, whatever. I'm not going to say which grounds, but it was at a stomp grounds, a Cherokee stomp grounds in Northeast Oklahoma. And Yeah, they said they're out there. This was like maybe back in the 70s or 80s, but some woman showed up and they never see, because when you're at like stomp dance, you generally recognize the people that are out there, who's been out there before, who's a guest, who's with who, that kind of thing. You just know. And nobody recognized this woman, and she was stomp dancing, and she had on her stomp dance skirt, and somebody caught a peek under of her feet, and they were deer hooves. And once somebody was like, it's a deer woman, she just hopped up really high, like really high in the air, and then just ran off into the woods, and I never seen her again. And another way, how it was told to me by somebody about deer woman, because we all have grown up with deer woman stories, and who she is. She's always like this really beautiful native woman with like long black hair. All the guys like her and stuff.
Siren.
Yeah, the Native American siren, and can seduce men who maybe are ill-intentioned and maybe not the best men, and seduce them and get them out into the woods, and then have her way with them, and then stomp on them to death, right, and kill them.
Yeah.
And in some ways she's seen as like kind of negative context. But a story that I always like to tell about Dear Woman is nobody talks about how she came to be in the first place. And so a version of it that I've been told is that way back when, there was a native female, and she was going on a walk away from her village, from her idalwa, whatever you want to call it. And she was by herself, and she went out to this field. Well, a group of men came upon her, some warriors, and took advantage of her, had their way with her, and to the point to where she was left to lay dying in a field. And that as they left her alone, dying in this field, it was a deer that came up to her and started licking all of her wounds. And that deer laid down with her until she died and passed away. So that whenever she came back as part deer to honor that deer that stayed with her as she lay dying. And now that she's part woman, part deer, like she's a lesson to men that may not have the best intentions towards women. That was my story. One of you two can share.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like I have a project right now where that has I'm not going to say what it is, but it has there's a deer woman in it, and it's similar. It's like looking at the deer woman as this entity of, not hunting down good men, but the bad ones, which I think is like the fresh take on Dear Lady, and also like, it's interesting is like working with people from other countries, indigenous people from other countries, there's like Goat Man, like, which is a very similar one, but it's,
I've not heard of that one. What culture is that?
I don't know. It's a Pacific Islander, from what I've heard, and I'd never heard it before. I don't know kind of any stories about it or whatever, but it is something that I know at least one culture does. And then I've heard other goat versions as well from North American tribes as well.
Also, for anybody watching, I realized this was kind of happening last time. If you have any questions or you want like something clarified, I guess you can like ask a question in the comments.
Hey, Lux, are you okay?
Gabby, you don't have.
I wonder why.
Are you okay? That was Gabby Baez. Okay, so
I guess go ahead, Apollonia. If you, I guess I could tell one more if we need to, but if we,
tell them one, and then if Sterlin, you have another, then we can sign off or something.
This is kind of, I guess, a general comment on how to get rid of a ghost. I figure it's a good time of year to hear about how to get rid of a ghost. So at least the way I was taught by Numpsha, by Grandpa, was that, I don't know why, this is just the way it is. They don't like to be yelled at. Ghosts don't like to be yelled at. And he said, in fact, if, he said, you gotta, he said, you have instincts for a reason, right? Sometimes something shows up and it's not bad and it doesn't scare you. But if something shows up and it scares you, you have instincts for a reason and there's a reason to be scared. So he actually told me to start yelling and cussing them out with the most foul language you can possibly come up with. And I thought, man, that just sounds outrageous, right? But then lo and behold, Don Patterson, Tonka, right? Older guy, old AIM guy, trouble leader, etc. He told me the same thing, right? If it scares you, that's the best thing you can do. And I guess a couple times I've been in situations where, there was things that go on like that. Some that could be handled that way and some not. I guess when I was younger, before I knew these things, there used to be a ghost. It was quite obviously my now ex-husband's great grandma. She was killed by her husband. He threw a brick at her and then she ended up dying. And you'd see her crossing that yard, feeding her chickens, and just there, as if she were actually there. And I got a little bit older and was with my grandma. And it was after my grandpa had passed away. Not this grandpa, other grandpa. And we were pulling up to her house at night and she had a carport. And right there where the house was at the end of the carport, there was a window into the kitchen. And we pulled up and my grandpa, who was deceased, was standing at the kitchen window, getting a glass of water, clear as day. And so my grandma and I went in the house and I followed her inside and she kept me behind her. And we went through that entire house and she opened every door to every cabinet, every closet until we went through the whole house. And I looked at her and said, what would you have done had somebody been behind one of those doors? And she said she didn't know. She had no idea. But, years pass and I've learned this information, and so I'm spending the night there again. This is after my grandma has passed away. And at this point, my mom is living in the house. I'm staying in this bedroom and my mom's got her Bible sitting on the dresser right here beside me. And in the middle of the night, I heard this voice and it was so clear that it was not a human voice. And I don't know how to explain that except that the whole pitch of a voice of a spirit is different. And, I've sometimes heard things that were good things, like if you're sitting in a meeting, sometimes you can hear those old ladies singing and it's not just me that hears them. So I know I'm not nuts, but the voice is like that. But this was scary. And all it got out was the beginning of the syllable M. And I sat up in that bed cussing as loudly and horribly as I could at the same time that I was grabbing my mama's Bible off of the dresser. And I just used everything I had and it shut up. And I was so relieved because I did not want to hear. I suspect it was my grandpa, but I didn't really want to talk to him. So it was bad enough having to see him a couple of years before that. So I was done, but that's it. So if you got to get rid of a ghost, cuss it out really loud. I hate it. Maybe pull out the Bible too.
It's funny how quick we'll grab that Bible, boy, when we're scared. I keep one. I just keep them all over the house just in case. I don't know that I have another one, but I kind of get into these funny ones. But I think that our people are, it's funny, like situations of like, especially our elders and stuff. And I have an uncle that is real like he's very paranoid about like somebody putting medicine on him or something, and we all have like that one uncle, I think, that is just like, or auntie that is just like, throwing salt behind their back and putting salt around the perimeter of the house because spirits can't get in that way and all that. One time my grandma had a dog named Slop Bucket, and she had the best names for dogs. She had one dog named Tickhead, which you obviously know why. But, and like she treated, like my grandma was not one of these, like, let the dog lick your face type of thing, because they always say like, elders will say like, dogs are the watchers and protectors of spirits, and like those, it looks like they have another set of eyes above their eyes, and that's what they can see spirits with. And anyway, my uncle would always like kind of be nervous about coming down to a gathering or something. So sometimes he'd yell at, he'd lie and act like he wasn't coming. Usually if he said he wasn't coming, that means he was coming. And if he wasn't going to come, he would say he was coming. And so like you could expect him to be there if he said he wasn't going to be there, because he didn't want someone, you know, with bad intentions to making medicine to put a spell on him or something, you know. And but one time he showed up at my grandma's house and everyone was standing around in a circle talking, and the dog Slot Bucket just like he just got out of the car. Dang, my lights went out, all scary. He just got out of the car and walked up and joined this circle, and they're all talking and chatting, and then the dog walked into the middle of the circle, laid down and died. And he freaked out, turned around, got back in his car and drove back to Tulsa.
Wait,
So.
I'm gonna say real quick, Sterlin, I think we've all had a moment, Lord knows I have a couple of times, where I've been out in rural Oklahoma hanging out with people, you know, and there just comes a moment late in the night where I'm like, F this. No, I need to get back home to Tulsa. I ain't trying to stay out in like huge county. I'm going back to Tulsa.
Yeah, I'm feeling like that right now.
Yeah, of course you are. You ain't getting no deer tomorrow. Quit lying. Okay. What time is it? Yeah. Okay. 8:56. So I guess we'll wrap it up. I want to thank everybody that has tuned in and watched.
See if they have any questions first, Apollonia, since we got a couple of minutes. Give everyone a chance.
Yeah. If anybody has any questions they want to ask, like put it in the chat or just unmute your mic, I guess, and ask directly. Don't be scared. We won't bite. We're not that savage sometimes. But I do want to say, in the meantime, anybody's thinking of any questions they want to ask, that the next episode of Honka Happy Hour I'm going to be doing will be the third and last episode, and it will be on October 30th. And it will be with Warren and Welena Quiton.
Oh, they're gonna have some good ones for sure.
I know, and you know they're gonna be dressed up too. They always dress
King again.
and then it'll turn, and then somehow they'll co-opt it, and it's gonna turn into Indian Bingo Hour.
Exactly.
So yeah, I wish, God, these dogs. So yeah, that's what I have to say. Also, I just want to remind people too, if they wanted to like throw some money out for the storytellers, you know, that good way, that reciprocity way. There's a PayPal and a Venmo that I put up on the Facebook event page. But also Kim is she's recorded this, and so if people have missed it or you want to rewatch it, there's going to be a link available too, so that you can watch this later. So
yep. If Sterlin wants to edit it, he can. I'm just joking. I hate editing. I hate editing everything. Making stuff is great. Editing it. Ugh.
Oh, it's tough. The worst is watching someone else edit, though. That's even worse. All right. Cool.
Daniel, he doesn't know what Indian Bingo is. I'll just text you, Daniel, about what Indian Bingo is. These dogs,
they might still have the links up.
Yeah.
Oh, we got a Mojave.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. Well, I guess we'll end this now. So have a good night, everybody.
Mado. Thanks, Apollonia. Thanks, Kim. See you.
Be careful. It's good to see you guys. Thank you, Sterling. Thank you, Apollonia.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody, for seeing us.
Thanks for y'all being on.
Don't be scared.
You will.